So let's start with your questions. You can still ask questions though if you have some. I skin pick almost constantly and eat my scabs. I'm in therapy, but that isn't working. Is there any medication that is available for blunting the urges? So I don't know what kind of therapy you're in, but studies that we have for now unequivocally show that psychotherapy is more efficient than any medication. If you have a psychiatrist or you're able to find one, they can prescribe certain kinds of antidepressants that might be useful, but not as useful as psychotherapy. And then you have NAC as a supplement, although sometimes someone told me that it has been reclassified, so it's not called a supplement anymore, but I believe it is still freely available. So NAC helps you reduce urges by about 50%, but it only helps about half of the people. So see what it works. What I would maybe do is focus on changing the way you approach therapy. So just tell your therapist that it isn't working and try to find another strategy, because whatever approach they're taking, there's always more than one way to approach something. So assess the strategies that don't work, see what are the most difficult spots, and try to work parallel on two things. One, emotional regulation, and the two, specific behavioral techniques. And if you're in skin pick, then just kind of share your impression with your therapist and ask them to add more on top of what you're already doing, so they will come up with additional techniques for you to try. I caught myself picking my skin while lounging here listening to the webinar. I'm really sorry. I will put next time like a recommendation for people to wear gloves while they watch the webinars. I'm really sorry, but maybe you can think if there were any specific parts of of the webinar or anything I said that may have triggered you. You know, I mean, picking is bad enough. Let's see if you can use it to learn something useful. Is skin picking a symptom or display of BFRB? So BFRB stands for body focused repetitive behavior, and skin picking is a type of body focused repetitive behaviors. So there are others like cheek biting or nail biting or hair pulling and so on. So it's just BFRB, or body focused repetitive behaviors, is just an umbrella term for these different problems that people deal with. Can you talk about how neuroplasticity changes with age? Well, the way generally it tends to decline. There's really not much more. I can actually send you some studies. I think I might have a free one that I downloaded, so I can share it. I see your name, so I know what your email address is because you're my client. So I might be able to send you something, but overall, it tends to decline. But when they do these studies and measure this, these are people who have done nothing to change this. It's kind of like, I remember like a couple of years ago when I was talking to my dad, and so my dad has gained a lot of weight since I was a child. And he kind of insists that that's just what happens, you know, when people get older. And that's not just something that happens when people get older, it's something that you allow yourself to happen. And the same goes with neuroplasticity. It tends to, so it becomes more difficult for your brain to rewire and change. But that doesn't mean that it cannot do so. It just means that you need to find different strategies to work and attack from more fronts at once. If you remember, I was talking about new skill acquisition. Considering that you're my client, I know that you're intellectually very curious, that you always learn something new. So these are all the things that help. And it also means that you might need more diligent repetition. But that's all. It doesn't mean that there are some skills that are beyond your reach, just that you might need to invest a little more time. I'm going to speculate a little bit now because I don't have any solid science I can't think of a study that will confirm this. But overall, as we age, our metabolism tends to change. That means that the way that our brain, not just our brain, but our entire bodies, the way they make energy and the way that they synthesize proteins, the way that they basically change themselves, becomes a little less efficient and a little slower. So that means that it's not just the brain that loses its plasticity slowly over time. It's also that other parts of our body function differently. So it's a kind of comprehensive process. And there's nothing much that you can do to reverse this, but you can provide stimuli for your brain continuously so that it has to challenge itself in a certain way. For example, one of the studies that I remember, but this is a very, very old study that had to do with mindfulness and neuroplasticity. It was one of the first studies that showed that long-term mindfulness causes actual structural change in the brain. And if I remember correctly, it was done by a German team, but don't hold this as being entirely accurate because it's been years since I even looked at that study. But what they did was they went to Southeastern Asia and Tibet, and they found a lot of very experienced and very old meditators, and their brains didn't lose any neuroplasticity. In fact, they were very agile mentally. This is because they always had meditation and mindfulness as something that kept their brains fresh in a certain way. So it's not inevitable. It's just when people don't do anything to counter the effect, that's what happens. Something occurred to me. I wonder if being multilingual is a precursor to the ability of neuroplasticity to function better. Also, do you know if tapping therapy affects neuroplasticity? Thank you very much. And I really loved your metaphor about the landscape architect and the parks. Well, you're welcome. I'll tell my friend that his story is very useful. Being multilingual does help because in learning, if you're an older person and if you've ever been to a doctor, sometimes they will give those like brochures and flyers and stuff that will kind of tell you all these things that you can do to adopt a healthier lifestyle. One of these is usually learning a new language, because it really is an excellent tool for neuroplasticity, because it trains your memory. It makes you use your prefrontal cortex, because you have to do puzzle solving to learn different grammar. Especially if you select my suggestion, if you really want to challenge yourself, try learning a language that's not Indo-European, like Hungarian, for example. Like after English, Hungarian will literally seem like an alien language. It will require your brain to change everything it knows about how languages work, or Japanese, for example. So absolutely, that definitely makes your brain overall function better. It's even solving puzzles. Like I remember my grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, she used to, until the day she died, she used to continuously read different books. Even when she wasn't able to see anymore, we bought her a Kindle, and then she would like zoom in to have like 2 sentences in one on the screen, and she learned how to use it. And she kept reading all kinds of stuff and solving crossword puzzles. And for whatever reason, until the day she died, she was extremely sharp intellectually, but she never stopped sort of using her brain for all kinds of things. So absolutely that works. Also, just keep in mind that learning new languages is much, much easier if you're younger, especially if you're a child. Like kids, for example, I grew up having to speak more than one language, and that was really very easy. Now, when I try learning another language, which I do, I like it because it's fun. Grammar is like math to me. So now it's a little bit difficult to remember some words, for example. So what I do is I try not to frustrate myself, because I also work, so I don't really have time to study a new language 5 hours every day. But then what I do is that I will take a language from a group of languages that I already speak. So for example, I speak Italian and Spanish. And so if I'm going to learn another language, it's probably going to be, I don't know, another Romance language. Maybe not French. French and I have a very complicated history, but maybe Romanian, let's say. Because in that way, I already understand a good part of the grammar and already have a vocabulary. I also speak Serbo-Croatian, so that means that every Slavic language would be, doable. It would be. There is this term in psychology which is called the optimal level of frustration, and that's what you need to give your brain as well. So it needs to be challenged, but it doesn't need to be beaten into thinking it's not good enough. And as far as the tapping therapy works, I don't know if it affects neuroplasticity. In fact, that I know of, there's really no evidence. No one has done a study to show that it's effective. Having said that, I've had many clients in the past who used tapping as a very effective competing response to replace picking. And they've modified it to use like specific surfaces to provide themselves with adequate sensory stimulation as well. So I know that it's useful for picking. And as long as you establish it, the way that I'm thinking about this is that you don't really need a study to think logically about these things. Whatever habit you introduce, it has to have some sort of equivalent in how your brain functions. Maybe not in visible structure, but certainly in the way that your brain works. And if you change habits or introduce new habits, that is neuroplasticity. So in a wider sense, yes, but do I know of specific studies that test it? No. Do you need these studies? I'm not really sure. We can't really just test everything in the world. A psychologist told me that the why of my picking doesn't matter and that behavioral modification and journaling collecting data is what matters for recovery. What do you think of that opinion, and does that view align with neuroplasticity? You can certainly retrain your brain without knowing why, if by why you mean like if there was a specific childhood event or something like this. But I think it is absolutely necessary to investigate that aspect of validation on whatever level. You don't have to travel into the past. You can explore it in whatever way works for you. I think to do behavioral modification, strictly speaking, you don't need to know why. But if I can, personally, I like to know why, because okay, let me give you a practical example. I've had a client last year who only wanted behavioral modification. And in fact, she told me at the beginning of our treatment that this whole crap that I talk about, what things mean and all this, she doesn't believe in any of that because she's a surgeon. So I said, okay, whatever, their life. So I don't really tend to oppose people in that way. And so we did behavioral modification and she did stop picking. She coped with it very well because she was very disciplined and she used the tools very well. And she was in therapy for about 3 or 4 months in skin pick in the program. And she reduced her picking almost to zero because we have an assessment tool that you take every week so that you can follow your progress. And her last assessment was like 4 out of 100, for example. But you know what happened? She gained a lot of weight during the program. And then when I tried to point out that this is also a way of regulating emotions, she basically dismissed it and said, well, fine, I will go on a diet. So to me, the why is not necessary for you to actually deal with one type of behavior. But if there is a why that remains, unaddressed, like a need that remains unmet, it will find another outlet. If emotional regulation is the why, for example, then you need to deal with emotional regulation or you'll just be coming up with other symptoms. Or you'll become anxious or nervous, or you'll yell at someone or whatever. So strictly speaking, for behavioral modification, it is absolutely not necessary. What's necessary is to understand the triggers, understand the behavior, understand what the validation is, and just find one or more habits that will replace it. And then practice, practice, practice as much as you can over a long period of time, because remember, neuroplasticity is slow. Absolutely. How can I stop my 13-year-old as she has permanent scars? So one thing that you can do is, speaking of behavioral modification, we will have a free course for people who cannot afford to join our program for habit reversal training. So once it becomes available, just subscribe to our mailing list and you will know when it becomes available. So you can just work with her and do that. Because she's too young for our program, 13 years old, you can join our parents program, for example, and then we can guide you step by step how to implement habit reversal and acceptance and commitment therapy with her. So basically, you would be assigned to a therapist in our program who would help you help your child. What we created was a program that's similar to our adult program, only appropriate for younger clients. You can also teach her some relaxation techniques that also tends to do the job. What are some good examples to implement for a behavior not to pick? So I think I mentioned several different things, but when I was talking about that in the beginning, but let's talk for now about competing responses. So a good competing response would be, one second. I don't know where I put my stress. Okay, so there's a infinity cube, for example. I bought this to see if it would work as a competing response, and then I started playing with it all the time. So basically, it's if you feel a lot of like restlessness in your hands, this is something you can play with. And it's also something that you can use at work because fidget toys aren't considered particularly strange. If the sensory stimulation is what you need, you might want to find a piece of fabric that imitates the type of sensory stimulation that works well, and then just carry that with you. Or you might want to use a worry stone. You can use a spinner ring. Depending on where you pick, you might want to take breaks if you work. If it's stress related, then I would also suggest, for example, taking breaks at work to relieve stress, but then also working on stress management in a more comprehensive way. So those would be some ideas that just sort of randomly came to my mind. But always think short-term, long-term. Like you need help short-term, a competing response is very good for that. But you also need to see whether it's anxiety or, I don't know, stress or whatever else it might be, so that you can deal with it in the long run. Otherwise, the urge will just come back over and over again. But specifically what will soothe you, none of these things that I listed could be, what works for you. What you need to do is gather more data. So you can download our self-monitoring app. It's free. You don't have to join the program, and just monitor sort of in all the different ways in which picking soothes you, and then try to write down or journal about things that provide similar stimulation, and slowly over time you will find specifically what works for you. What's the best lotion or a band-aid to cover scabs that we are picking on our legs? So in terms of band-aids, I don't think my clients have ever really discussed specific brands. So whatever you think is aesthetically most pleasing. And in terms of lotions, so I'm not a dermatologist. I like to stick to the, things that I know best. So I wouldn't be able to recommend anything kind of highly specific, but it should be something hydrating, because that will help your skin gain more flexibility and it will help it heal. And you can also use an antibiotic ointment and put it on immediately after you pick to prevent infections. And also maybe use a vitamin C supplement. That's something very simple that most people wouldn't consider, but vitamin C actually helps collagen synthesis. And collagen is kind of like the skeleton for your skin. So when your skin starts growing back, first it creates this network of collagen, and then the rest grows on. So by taking vitamin C, for example, you're also helping your skin heal. And you might also want to check two types. If you use a normal kind of hydrating lotion or a cream, it gets absorbed very quickly. So it will make the scabs softer. If that deters you from picking, excellent. What I've noticed with some clients, or rather what some clients have reported to me, is that what feels good for them is to use an ointment. So something that will not be absorbed very easily. And then when you put it on the scab, when you touch it initially, it's not that pleasant sensation. In fact, it's kind of dirty. So it paradoxically acts as a stimulus control technique as well, because it prevents you from touching them, and it really kind of repels some people from touching their skin. I don't have questions, just to thank you for this really great info presented so clearly. Well, thank you. Best advice I've heard about picking in 40 years. Oh, well, thank you very much. Also check out our other webinars, because every month you select different topics, and then we've talked about many different things. What is MBSR and what does it stand for? So it's mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's a program that was devised by Jon Kabat-Zinn, as I said, like back in the 70s. He used it with patients in Massachusetts in one of their hospitals there. He's actually a biochemist. He's not even in the field of mental health by training. And that was the first program that was related to mindfulness that was validated as being, that had a study that shown that it works. And because it is structured very well, researchers like to use it a lot. And because it's been used in research for the past 30 years, you have a lot of studies to compare your results to. So it's very, very commonly used. You have MBSR centers all around the US. I know that there are some in the UK, although not nearly as many, and around Europe, every country will have one or two instructors. But nowadays with internet, you can find it, anywhere. You can find teachers very easily. You can also buy John Kabat-Zinn's book called Full Catastrophe Living. It's quite a chunky book. It has like 600 pages or something. But in that book, he explains the whole program in kind of very friendly layman's terms, without either using new agey language that people sometimes don't like, or without being too technical. So he's actually an excellent writer in mindfulness in general because of this. But if you want to learn about MBSR, Full Catastrophe Living contains the whole program, including instructions for meditation. I guess nowadays maybe you get a CD or something, or not CD. Like maybe there's like a place online where you can find the guided meditations as well. So you can basically do it without a teacher is what I'm trying to say. Hi, doctor, I'm enjoying the webinar. Is this about the program? I have written about a difficulty I've had both to you and your support, but no one answered. Oh, I'm so sorry. Please email me again. Sometimes, especially after the webinars, I receive an enormous amount of emails, and then sometimes I miss some. And just yesterday, I discovered in my spam folder that I have some client emails that I have never seen. So I'm really sorry. Please just forward the email again, and I will respond tomorrow. I promise. So specifically, our program doesn't mention neuroplasticity, but obviously from this, it does rely on it. The second study said, it said that memory training, meditation, and yoga have shown. Was this in combination, or if subjects engaged in one of them? So the paragraph that I took from the study is from the discussion. So basically, they quoted some other sources. The study itself was only about meditation. I don't do yoga. I did when I was younger, but it just never stuck with me. So I know that there are studies in yoga as well, but whether or not it has the same effect on the brain structure, I really don't know. That it's beneficial for anxiety, for depression, and for stress, that I know. But whether these specific results that I read apply to yoga, I can't tell you for sure. This paper that I quoted is available for free. So if you just type in the title on PubMed, you can get the whole paper for free. But I'm pretty sure that this was just from the discussion, so they didn't test for this. I tried to find a therapist in my insurance network and discovered that most of the therapists do not even take insurance. Why do therapists not want to take insurance for this therapy? So a lot of therapists, including myself, don't take insurance because we hate paperwork. It's very simple. Sometimes therapists who are complete beginners will take insurance because they need something to, jumpstart their practice. But thank God I'm out of that stage. Now I get to pick and choose who I want to work with. So that's why most therapists don't do that. I don't know what to say other than that. And also, I understand that therapy is not very affordable. Like, it is a very expensive thing to do if you want to find an in-person therapist. You can try programs like ours. Like, our program monthly will cost you, well, more or less as much as one face-to-face session will, but because it's done in writing, so it's affordable. And also another reason why specifically for this, even in some insurance companies won't cover treatment, is because until very recently, skin picking wasn't classified in DSM-5 as an official. Well, in DSM-5 it is, but in the old versions it wasn't. So now it's officially called excoriation disorder or dermatillomania, but before it wasn't even classified. So you would be asking for treatment for something that isn't officially a mental health issue. And because insurance companies, if I may be frank, fundamentally don't really care about anyone's well-being, they care about what they can charge for or cannot charge for, they strictly adhere to these diagnoses. So that could be a part of the reason as well. And also when it comes to skin picking, hair pulling, and other BFRBs, a lot of therapists don't feel competent to treat patients. And for whatever reason, they also don't find that it's necessary to learn. Instead, they just say that that's not a problem that they work with. So that also has to do with it. Because really, I remember back when I was in medical school, for example, all I knew about trichotillomania, for example, because back then that was the only one that we had in our textbooks. And there was like one paragraph in Kaplan's synopsis. Like literally, it wasn't even like a whole colon on a page. It was like 1 or 2 paragraphs. And all you get there is, we don't know how often, it happens. They give you some numbers, say here, you have antidepressants in therapy, and that's it. So many people genuinely really don't learn much about this, which is a great shame, because BFRBs are much more common than most psychological disorders that we do learn a lot about, but it's not something, unfortunately, that I'm able to fix. I have sensory issues due to autism. When I tried mindfulness, it made my sensory issues worse because my skin picking became even more out of control. Is there a type of mindfulness that numbs or doesn't enhance sensitivities? So there is not a single type of mindfulness that will numb anything. That is the opposite of what mindfulness does. But if you are on the spectrum, sensory overload is something that obviously kind of goes with the territory. So I completely understand why mindfulness caused this effect on you. What you can do is, so there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of meditations out there. So my suggestions would be to start to try some other types. Like in general, when we talk about mindfulness, we talk about balancing awareness and concentration. Some types of mindfulness will emphasize awareness, like Vipassana, for example. Other types of mindfulness will emphasize concentration. So, for example, if you focus on types of meditation that are about concentration, that might help you while you're meditating to block out, as your focus becomes stronger, you will be able to block out, other input. So that's something you can do. For example, mantra meditations or rosary prayers, they work in the same way. Basically, they reduce your focus to one phrase that you repeat very quickly, or just syllables that don't mean anything in particular. And then that's where your focus is. And then everything else kind of phases out of your awareness as you get absorbed. So maybe that's something to try. Also, if I were you, I wouldn't necessarily give up on whatever type of mindfulness you tried. I would just dose it for myself. So I would see what the maximum time for me currently is, and then do that for, let's say, 2 weeks. And then I would try to increase it by 1 minute, because that way you're building tolerance to sensory overload. It's just that because of autism, you might have to do it more slowly than other people might. Because, for example, I don't have autism, but that kind of sensory overload really does happen even for me in meditation sometimes. Like, it's like your whole body just in certain moments just lights up, or sounds just come out of nowhere. So it is a common experience. So just start with some minimum time that doesn't cause this, and then slowly increase. It's like going to the gym, basically. You can also try walking meditation. Maybe that might be helpful for you. Or try guided meditations, because they're good for beginners, but they also give you some sort of structure. And when you have a voice that guides you, then you're less likely to become overwhelmed. Thank you for another great webinar. You're welcome. Does skin picking sometimes lead to life-threatening bacterial infections? I hope not, or that it's rare things. So can it lead to life-threatening bacterial infection? I mean, I guess in theory, you could say that it could, but I don't know that it was life-threatening. But I've had clients who have had serious bacterial infections that required quite a lot of antibiotic treatments. One even had the MRSA, the methicillin-resistant staphylococcal infection, which is really difficult to treat. This is why sometimes when clients start therapy and they can't stop picking right away, like we need to go very slowly. One thing that we do is sometimes I will ask people to specifically implement in the routine some type of self-care, which is if your picking is focused, for example, then at least make sure to wash your hands, make sure make sure to wash your hands, then make sure to put a timer that will tell you how long you can pick, and then take care of your skin, clean it, and make sure that it doesn't get infected. My therapist has refused to release content when I have requested. I'm unhappy with this aspect and I wish to review the material. Okay, so basically you're asking for change of therapist in SkinPick. So this is not something that I can do from here. Just please send me an email and I'll see what I can do for you, but I can guarantee you that no therapist will release content upon your request. That's just not going to happen, because in therapy, first of all, our program has a built-in speed at which it can go. So your therapist cannot unlock more than one session per week. And that's just the way that the system is made. So she might simply not be able to do that. Otherwise, I would advise you to, before changing therapists, just try to work it out with her and tell her how you feel. Because being angry at your therapist or frustrated with them is a normal part of the process. It's called transference, and it happens to every client at some point in therapy. Can you say more about the SkinPick program? I'm very interested in it, especially because so many therapists have huge wait lists right now. Yeah, that is true. COVID has been, a curse and a blessing. Depends on what level you look at it. So I guess a lot of people here know about the program. What I would suggest that you do is tune in next week, because next week, I believe it will be Tuesday. I will have a short webinar about like 20 minutes, maybe 15 to 20, depending on how long it takes, where I will talk only about the program, about how it works, what you can or cannot do, how long it lasts, how the sessions are structured, all of it. So you can, if you're on the mailing list, I'm sure that they will send you information about that. Or you can simply email me and then I will send you information about that. But it will be next week, next Tuesday, I think 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have been picking for 20 plus years. Are there any studies on how long of a habit it is too long to change? Do people who pick for decades actually have long-lasting success in changing their behaviors? Yes, they do. It just takes a longer time, and it takes more discipline and more persistence, but absolutely yes. I mean, there are no studies that I know of that say that after this many years you can't change. It just takes longer, because it's more like those circuits in your brain are very strong and kind of deeply embedded, but it is possible. There's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't be able to change. Can you speak to any experience with clients who pick their skin on various parts of their bodies and are also extremely anxious about getting skin infections? The anxiousness about the potential of infection does not seem to be enough to stop the picking itself, but then there is ruminating about the potential of infection for days after. Sometimes there are actual infections that happen as well. So first, I would advise you to do what I proposed to another, I mean, it doesn't say the name, so it could be the same person, which is to make sure to use an antibiotic ointment, or to at least wash the skin with a mild soap, to do whatever you can to prevent skin infections. So that's just a responsible thing to do. But here in this case, what you're actually describing is that your fear of infection is actually perpetuating more picking, because if you remember, one part of picking has to do with how we tolerate or don't tolerate our emotions. And anxiety is particularly difficult to deal with because it's so vague and annoying. So having anxiety about the consequences of picking will eventually lead to more picking. So a place where you can start actually getting treatment is to make sure that you prevent all infections. Then reduce your picking to, let's say, I don't know, if you pick now for 10 minutes, reduce it to 5, make sure to take care of yourself before and after, and then start implementing something like habit reversal training, or just find a therapist. I don't know enough details to be able to recommend a specific form of treatment other than that. But there are many ways in which you can minimize risk of infection, and there's no reason that you don't do that. These webinars are excellent. Thank you for making the effort to offer them. I have some new insights which I will explore, and thank you. Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to do them. And even though this webinar was very difficult to make because I spent a lot of time looking for something, anything about skin picking and neuroplasticity, but I generally really enjoyed that people find them useful, especially because there are people who can't afford the program and then they can get some tips here. So it's always a plus. Someone said, try hydrocolloid bandages. They stay on longer. True, those are mentioned very frequently. I have found good goop to be very helpful, and it's possible to order on Amazon. So that would be another thing to look into. As far as sensory distractions go, fidget tools are somewhat helpful for me, but the pop of small bumps on my arms and release of that for me is hard to replicate. I have seen actual squeezing toys, but that doesn't quite do it for me. Any popping type of distraction that you would recommend that could be soothing? Also, bubble wrap doesn't work for me. Something needs to come out of that pop that provides the release for me. So if you can't find anything, maybe the trick is not there. I would, if I were you, I would spend some time exploring how that, when that something comes out, I would spend some time noticing how that makes me feel and then focus on whatever gives me that feeling. So not the immediate release, but what comes after. Because what you might be needing is actually just a more potent relaxation technique. So maybe try something like a breathing exercise. It doesn't have to replicate the sensation itself or the something coming out. It can also be, the focus can also be on the feeling and what it gives you. I'm having a hard time connecting with my therapist, perhaps because I'm struggling to send my reports to the app. Will I be charged for the weeks I don't receive correspondence from my therapist through the website? Well, you pay a monthly subscription. So if you will use the program once a day or once a month is up to you. So you are charged equally. If I were you, I would first share this with your therapist, whoever that is. And then I would schedule, typically you don't have to write every day for the program to work, because even in real life, you don't speak to your therapist every day. I mean, even in psychoanalysis, they have days when they rest. In the beginning, at least, even if you're struggling to send your reports, that's difficult. You can work around that. Just talk to your therapist, find a solution. But what's more important is that you write and stay in touch with them. So find like whatever tools for scheduling that you use and schedule 2 time slots per week where you will mandatorily write. And then during the week, if you think or want to write, do that. Also, if talking about picking is difficult for you, because sometimes people will join the program and then write very little or write things that aren't useful. Like you would ask them, how do you feel? And they would say not good, which, I don't really need to say is not very useful information. But this is because it's hard for them to actually deal with the topic. So not logging in, not writing, not using the program is a way to actually avoid thinking or dealing with picking altogether. Maybe what you can do is find another smaller topic that you feel comfortable working with, something that motivates you to write, and then work on that as well. Because nothing prevents you from talking about other things with your therapist. You can also perhaps ask your therapist if they can recommend some additional small tasks that you would be comfortable doing. If sending reports is the only obstacle, there's really no reason why you can't resolve it. Most of us want the reports and we like the reports because we get a lot of data from them. But if this is so difficult for you that you avoid the program itself, tell your therapist and then find a way to work around it, because there is always a way. Is there a way to get access to previous webinars? Yes, they're all uploaded to our YouTube channel. So in a couple of days, you will receive a link for this webinar specifically. And so just check out the channel and then they're all there. Usually we split them in 2 parts. One is like the lecture part, and then the other one is the Q&A, because otherwise you would have like a 2.5 hour long video that no one can go through. So something that has helped me is to use Dead Sea salt mixed with almond oil to scrub onto my skin with a mitt, and at the end of the shower. It reduces the amount of pimples that occur and softens the scabs so they don't feel like they need to be picked. So it's basically like you're exfoliating, if I understand what the effect of that is. That is actually a good idea, because then when you touch your skin, there are less things that would provoke you to pick. It's actually quite a good trick. What do you think about these techniques for maintaining neuroplasticity throughout aging? Can also specifically prevent Alzheimer's or Parkinson's rather than typical aging? So certainly, if they slow down cognitive decline, you're less likely to have Alzheimer's. It's difficult to say because we don't actually know what causes Alzheimer's. And also Alzheimer's, when you look at brains of people who have Alzheimer's disease, it's not that you just find normal brains who just so happen to have thinner structures or different wiring. You actually find substances that destroy the neural cells. They're called amyloid. There's a specific type of protein, but let's just call it amyloid for now. There's no reason to get into details, but this specific type is toxic to the cells around it. So when it comes to Alzheimer's, I don't think any of the techniques can reverse it, because the damage seems to be irreversible from what we know now. But maybe some of it can prevent the onset of it. Some can maybe slow it down. And when it comes to Parkinson's, I really don't know about any research that has to do with this. For Alzheimer's and neuroplasticity, there is research that I've seen, but for Parkinson's, I haven't seen any. What is the $60 discount for? Do you have a program? So I work for SkinPick. It's not my company, sadly, but yes, it's a structured program to help people stop picking. Thank you. This was a fantastic session. Well, you're welcome. I'm happy you enjoyed it. I have been picking for 40 years and have reduced from severe to mild on the SkinPick program. I'm trying to think of the scales, but that's quite a change, I have to say. That is really, really very good. Because mild is basically bordering on not needing therapy on the assessment scores. So congratulations. And after 40 years. So this is for someone who asked previously whether or not it's possible if you've been picking for a long time, because that's really impressive. Congratulations, you've done a great job. Thank you for another excellent webinar. You're welcome. Okay, so I think this is a good place to stop, because I feel like I need to drink water or I will faint. So that tells me that now we can stop. I hope to see you all in September, and some of you next week on the promotional webinar where I will talk about the program. And have a pleasant evening or night or morning, depending on where you are in the world. Bye.